more misinformation by the GOP regarding Donald Trump's verdict, but at this point, we're not surprised, are we? This time it's in the form of misinformation regarding the instructions that Judge Merchan had given the jury before the verdict was rendered. And specifically, the inaccuracies about Judge Merchan telling the jury apparently that they didn't have to agree on a crime in order to convict Trump. And the entire GOP latched onto it, with Marco Rubio amplifying the message and Kristi Noem interrupting the writing of her new book, Mind Pups. Got it? Mind Pups, to tell us that Merchan's instructions are in violation with a Supreme Court ruling that has nothing to do with anything. Anyway, is it true that Judge Merchan instructed the jury that they didn't have to agree on a crime and still could find Trump guilty? No, and let's find out why. Now, buckle up, because it's going to be a little bit of a complicated road. Step number one, the prosecution asserted that the crime Trump committed was this one: falsification of business records. And New York state law says that this crime becomes a felony when it is done with a specific intention, the intention to conceal or commit another crime. So now the prosecution has to prove that falsification of business records occurred and has to prove that it was done to commit or conceal another crime. And that is the violation of this statute, which is part of New York election law, which involves two or more people conspiring to prevent or promote the election of a public official through unlawful means. This statute requires conspiracy to commit a crime. What crime? That is the third piece of what the prosecution had to prove. The prosecution for this third part asserted three criminal conducts: falsification of other different business records, violation of the Federal Campaign Act, and submission of false information as tax records. Now, in a crime like the one we're talking about, these three actions are called the predicate crime. Now, we call it a predicate crime every time the law requires a crime to be committed through the commission of a different crime, which is exactly what we're talking about here. Be familiar with this example. The law may punish more harshly somebody that, shall we say, unalives somebody else during a robbery. In our example, the robbery is the predicate crime and the unaliving is the primary crime. The jury has to be unanimous on the primary crime. Now, about the predicate crime, while they have to be unanimous on the fact that a predicate crime took place and was proven, they don't all have to agree on what that predicate crime was, as long as it was shown and proven by the prosecution. In other words, in the example that I gave you, all of these people have to agree that the unaliving took place. But when it comes to the predicate crime, the robbery, the people on this side of the box can believe that Joe and Betty were robbed, and the people on this side of the box can believe that only Michael was robbed. Unanimity when it comes to the predicate crime isn't needed. The only thing that they need to be unanimous in is the fact that a predicate crime was proven. In other words, no matter what Marco Rubio tells you, what Judge Merchan instructed the jury is that in order to convict Trump, they had to be convinced by the prosecution that, number one, Trump committed the primary felony, and number two, that he committed any and not necessarily all of the predicate crimes. If juror A thinks that Michael was robbed and juror B thinks that Betty was robbed, but both agree that somebody was unalived during those events, then you still have unanimity on the predicate and the primary crime. So no, the instructions that were given by Merchan do not mean that the usual rules of unanimity in a jury were in any way subverted. And by now you should know that Kristi Noem is very good at doing certain things, but maybe criminal procedure is not one of them.